Kubrick's Universe, Episode 8, Joe R Frinzi. Real one.
Our highly skilled team are focused on bringing you the optimal experience.
So many answers we may never know. Too many questions, get on with the show. No time for the chorus, only this verse. It's Kubrick's Universe.
Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick podcast.
Welcome to voice print identification. When you see the red light go on, would you please state in the following order your destination, your nationality, and your full name?
Moon, American, Floyd, Haywood R.
Thank you. You are cleared through voice print identification.
Thank you.
Quite frankly, we have had some very reliable intelligence reports that quite a serious epidemic has broken out into Cleves.
I know there have been some conflicting views held by some of you regarding the need for complete security.
Something apparently of an unknown origin.
However, I accept the need for absolute secrecy in this.
This is in fact what has happened.
I'm really not at liberty to discuss this.
We thought it might be the upper part of some buried structure, so we excavated out on all sides, but unfortunately we didn't find anything else.
It hasn't been covered up by natural erosion or other forces. It seems to have been deliberately buried.
4-million-year-old black monolith has remained completely inert, except for a single, very powerful radio emission.
3 weeks ago, the American spacecraft Discovery 1 left on its half-billion-mile voyage to Jupiter.
The sixth member of the Discovery crew was the HAL 9000 computer.
Everything is going extremely well.
One gets the sense that he is capable of emotional responses.
Well, hell, I'm dead if I can find anything wrong.
No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information.
Look, Dave, I can't put my finger on it, but I sense something strange about it.
Just a moment.
Do you know what happened?
I'm sorry, Dave. I don't have enough information.
Made radio contact with him yet?
The radio is still dead.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? You read me, Hal? Do you read me, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore.
And welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of Kubrick's Universe. At the boards is Mr. Fantabulistic, none other than Stephen Rigg himself. I am your host and humble narrator, Jason Furlong. So listen, guys, we got a really cool guest for you today. I speak, of course, of Joe R Frinzi. Now, Joe has been writing professionally since 1981. He's a lifelong resident of Easton, Pennsylvania, and has covered it all through his monthly film column called The Art of Cinema. Joe's column has appeared since 1998 in the Easton Irregular, which is the Lehigh Valley's premier arts publication. He published a collection of these volumes in a 2013 book called Movies on My Mind, which covers Metropolis to Black Swan, Stanley Kubrick to David Fincher, and pretty much everything in between. He's also written an illustrated children's book series in collaboration with former Disney artist Kati Kilbanks titled Princess Bria of Picolat. But it's his latest book that we want to talk to Joe about. Now, Joe originally wrote about 2001: A Space Odyssey in April 1998 on the film's 30th anniversary, with a piece entitled Beyond the Three-Act Play. This was only the second column he had written on the film, but it did allow him to expand and become more ambitious in his film writing. Now, on the film's 50th anniversary, Joe is here to talk with us about his first book on the subject, entitled Kubrick's Monolith: The Art and Mystery of 2001: A Space Odyssey. In it, Joe re-examines the film in a post-millennial context. It's a fascinating read. We're real fortunate to have you here, man. So, hey, Joe, thanks for being on the show.
I'm good. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, can you tell us how you first got into writing back in the early 80s?
Yeah, I was always interested in writing from the time I was a teenager. I wrote little short stories and things like that. You know, growing up, I took a creative writing course in high school. And when I got out of high school, I was interested in writing and filmmaking. I started making little movies on my own, Super 8mm film back in the 70s. And so anyway, I was always like pursuing creative endeavors, and it was really, writing short stories. And I started writing a science fiction novel at that point, and also, working on little films. So that's where it all began for me. And over a course of time, I kind of winnowed it down to the point where I wanted to write about film. Initially, I started doing prose science fiction stuff, being inspired by 2001. But then I got interested in making films and then writing about film. That became kind of my focus. And from the late 70s on, I was doing all kinds of little bits of writing here and there, and sold my first story 1980-81 to a magazine called Illusions, which was I wrote an article about the making of a spacesuit based on the 2001 spacesuit, which some friends and I had made back in the 70s. And I actually took that to a Star Trek convention back in 77.
Nice.
But anyway, that's where the writing began. And just over time, I just kept writing, and I found little outlets where I could, either have my work shown or I could actually get paid for it. And but things didn't really take off in a big way for me as a writer until I hooked up with the Easton Irregular and got the film column.
Now, you worked with for many years, I believe, with Carol Heffley on the Easton Irregular. Can you tell us what?
Yeah, she was the publisher and editor of that paper, and I met her. I had read the Irregular a couple times prior to that. It's like a local arts newspaper in my town, and I enjoyed it. And then I found out they were looking for a film writer. They wanted to do a film column, and a friend of mine who's an artist had done an art column, where he would interview artists or review shows and things like that. And when he found out that she was looking for someone to write a film column, he said, I have just the guy for you. And he introduced me to her, and then it took off from there.
And wow, and you have been with the Easton Irregular ever since, or did you?
I retired a couple of years ago after writing for 18 years for them, doing a monthly column. And originally, it's funny, when I got the job, I mean, not that it paid much or anything like that, it was just a local arts paper, but basically I thought it would last a year or so. I thought, oh God, I got a gig for a year, that'll be nice. And then 18 years later, I was still doing it. But, at that point I decided to, give it up because I kind of had run out of steam on it. And plus I was, heavily involved with the editing and expansion of my Kubrick's Monolith book with McFarlane Press. So I basically I didn't really have the time to do both things, at least not do them to the extent that I wanted to.
Yeah, well, I want to get to the book, but you brought up the spacesuit. I believe you wrote an article for the special effects mag Illusions, and we recently saw the picture of you in Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society. You shared that awesome picture of you wearing the 2001 replica spacesuit.
Right.
I mean, tell us about that. What was the motivation behind getting such incredible detail going on with that?
I had gone to a couple of Star Trek conventions back in the 70s, and the thing is, I'd seen a lot of people wearing costumes, and this is before the cosplay thing had taken off in a big way, it does now. And so people would do costumes of varying qualities of excellence, shall we say. And I had never seen anybody do anything connected with 2001 at any of these conventions. I'd only been to a couple of them, but they tended to be more like Star Trek oriented because they were Star Trek conventions rather than just general sci-fi conventions. They hadn't really taken off in a big way yet at that point.
Right.
And so I thought, since 2001 was my favorite movie, it's like, well, I want to do like the ultimate costume for, one of these conventions. And the obvious choice was to make a spacesuit. But I had no clue how to go about doing it. I didn't really have any of those skills to construct or build anything. And back in those days, there was no internet, no videotape. So just getting reference photographs was extremely difficult. And as a result, my suit is not 100% accurate, but it's not bad given, what we had to do. But I had a couple of friends who were like very skilled artists, and they very graciously agreed to help me make this suit. And they ended up doing really all the work. And the suit was just made out of like flat illustration board, including the helmet, by the way, which had to be molded into shape. Again, we didn't have access to fiberglass molding techniques or the money to do that kind of thing. We couldn't machine tool anything. So everything was basically handmade.
Wow.
And it turned out very, very well. And I had fun with it at the convention, and we took some pictures there. The picture that I posted is a more modern picture of me in the suit. And I photoshopped it into the background of the 2001 storage compartment room because I thought that looked really cool.
Yeah, it did. But you would never be able to tell from the photo that it was so homespun. I mean, it looks incredible.
Yeah, it holds up pretty good in photos. You notice some of the differences when you put side-by-side photos of the two suits.
Yeah.
And when you see it in person, obviously you can tell, what it's made out of. But it is really well done. And the guy who did the majority of the work on like the helmet and the packs, there's like little emblems on those things, and he hand painted all of them. Like there was a total of 5 emblems that had to be painted or made. And again, we didn't have printing things available to us back in those days, and he just hand painted all of them. And again, it's remarkable work. So I'm just glad I still have the suit. It's like over 40 years old now, and I still have it. And if I do any kind of signing events or something like that, I'm thinking of bringing the suit along and putting it on display. I thought it'll get some attention.
Yeah, you should. You should do that thing, most definitely. That's really cool. If I were you, I would bring that to book signings. But speaking of the book, I want to point out that you dedicated it to the memory of Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, and talk about their enormous impact which they'd had on your own artistic ambitions. So can you tell us when and how you first became aware of these two visionaries?
Sure. Essentially, 2001 was like the epiphany in my life. And I heard of 2001 when it first came out in '68. I would have been 13 then at the time. And for some reason, I didn't get to see it then. I don't remember why. It did come around to my town, I think like maybe in the fall, either the late summer or the fall of '68, or maybe it was even '69. But anyway, it did come around, and for some reason I didn't get to see it then. So I had kind of promptly forgotten about it because there was no multimedia things like there are today to keep it in your consciousness. So I just, more or less forgot about that movie. And then a couple of years later, when I was going to high school, they had like a little bookstore in the library where you could buy, paperbacks and things like that. And I remember I saw a copy of the novel there, the one that has Keir Dullea face on the front of it.
Right.
And I remember seeing that book and thinking, oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that movie. I never got to see it. And I opened up the book, and in the middle there was like an 8-page photo spread. And I remember being blown away by those photos because everything looked absolutely real. Nothing looked like movie sets or movie costumes.
Right.
And I was just totally blown away by the realism. And this was like at the height of NASA and things like that in America. So seeing something like this just was like amazing to me. So I promptly bought the book. I read it immediately. This would have been in 1970. And I loved the book. I didn't know really who Arthur C. Clarke was at that time. I was, only 15. I was just starting to get interested in reading, books and things like that. And so I loved the book. I read it a couple of times. And then I determined that, the next time that movie came around, I was going to go see it. And again, this is the pre-video era, so movies just kind of played around in theaters, and they would come back occasionally and things like that. So I waited in the spring of '71. It finally came around again, and I went to see it at a local movie theater. And I was like, totally blown away. I had no idea what to expect, and I was just totally, blown away by it. And it was really, like I say, an epiphany for me. And I actually went back and saw it the next day. I went right back and saw it. I believe it was a weekend, and so Sunday went back and saw it one more time, and I was hooked from that point on. It's like, and it came back a few months later, and I saw it a few more times, and then over the course of the next couple of years, it played around a couple of different theaters in the area, the Lehigh Valley area where I lived, and I would go and see it. And again, back then, that's how you would see movies, because they wouldn't necessarily show on television right away, and there was no home video market. So you would have to hope that at some of these sub-run houses, second-run houses, they would play movies over and over again. And I remember following it over the course of like a couple of years, where it kept playing all over the valley. And I traveled with friends, and we would just go see it again and again.
Yeah.
And I became a big Kubrick fan. That was my first Kubrick movie. And I remember going to the local library. Again, no internet. So I looked up his name, and I found some books on him. I think there was only one or two at that time.
Yep.
Because again, this would have been like 71, and found out more about the films he had done, and saw some of them on TV when they showed on like regular free television. And coincidentally, towards the end of that year, I discovered that he had a new movie coming out soon that was called Clockwork Orange. And that came out at the end of 71, and it came around my area in the spring of 72. And I had just turned 17 then, which at that time, that's how old you had to be to see an X-rated movie, which Clockwork Orange originally was.
Right.
So I went and saw that, and of course I was blown away by that one as well. And I read the book. I kind of got ahead of the curve on him finally. And so I discovered that, there was a novel that it had been based on, and so I became very quickly a big Kubrick fan, and started following his career. Saw as many of his older movies as I could when they showed on television, and read up articles that were in magazines about him and his work, because he was really becoming a big name at that point. And fortunately, the media was covering him as best they could. So I just continued to follow him over the years and learn more about him. And in the 70s, more and more books would coming out about, his films. And I bought a few of those as they came out, and, started my Kubrick book collection, not realizing someday I might be writing my own book on him. But at that point, it was just fun to read about him and learn more. And I became a big fan of how he worked, because I could tell even then that he was a very unique filmmaker, and he did things in a very, unique way that nobody else did. And so I kind of latched onto that and said, this is a guy I want to know more about.
Yes. I can relate to that in my own way. That's basically, like word for word, I could say that was kind of how I came to him. Everything you just said, I can relate to. And I am old enough to remember the world you described when there was no internet, and of course when there was no home video of any kind. And I remember being a little kid and my dad saying, this local theater is showing this Disney film, and we're going tonight. It's called Fantasia. I said, I don't want to go see a cartoon movie. I wanted to see an action movie. And it was one of those things that it only came around every 7 or 8 years. And I couldn't be more grateful, because I remember that was a seminal event, being in the theater and seeing Fantasia for the first time on a big screen and being blown away. And of course I own a copy on Blu-ray to this day, but so I can relate to that. And,
well, that was a big film for me too.
Yeah. I mean,
Fantasia
it really
was a big movie for me.
Extraordinary film. I mean, really, just what else can you say but a timeless work of art. And
absolutely.
I relate to going to the library and trying to find books on the guy when there was no internet. There was just card catalogs and very few books available in our local public library, and also building your own little Kubrick library on your shelf, etc. But you managed to write your own book, and to go one step beyond, as if that weren't cool enough, I have to read this quote, relating to your latest book, Kubrick's Monolith, because it's from lead actor Keir Dullea. He said, and I quote, "Kubrick's Monolith is the most profound and best written analysis of 2001: A Space Odyssey I've come across since the movie was released in 1968. It's almost as if Joe Frinzi had resided for a time in director Stanley Kubrick's brain. Through this book, I learned more about the film that I was in than I ever knew from having been in it. Enjoy a fabulous read," end quote. Now, man, that is one hell of an endorsement. How did you manage to get this great quote for the book?
Well, I was very fortunate. I had been working on the book, and actually I was getting to the point where I had run into so many difficulties getting it published, finding a publisher who was interested or an agent who was willing to take me on, that I had resolved that I was going to just self-publish my book, the 2001 book. And I'd done it before with the movies on my mind. That was a self-published book, which I basically had made to have as a kind of an expensive calling card to hand out to publishers and agents and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my resolve, I was just going to self-publish it. And then coincidentally, right around that time, Keir Dullea appeared at a film festival not too far from where I lived, about maybe a 45-minute drive. And it was called the Black Bear Film Festival in Milford, Pennsylvania. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine named Mike Gunkowski, who, he and I share a lot of things about films and whatnot. He's a big film buff too. He told me about this film festival being there, and he says, "Joe, do you want to go to it?" I don't drive, so, I had heard about this one, but I thought, well, that's too far to go. I don't have any way to get there, and I'm not going to ask anyone. But my friend Mike said, he goes, "I want to go to this because Keir Dullea is going to be there, and I'll be happy to drive, all that way up there." And so I agreed. I said, "Well, okay, if you want to do it, we can do it." So we went to this thing, and it's very nice. Milford's a very nice town, and this was like in the fall, so all the leaves had changed. It's a really beautiful small town to be in. And so we went there, and Keir Dullea he was like the guest of honor. They were going to show one of his movies, which was Bunny Lake is Missing. And so I brought a copy of my Movies on My Mind book. I thought, if I can see him, I'll give him a copy of it. And anyway, he was there, and very friendly, very nice guy. I had met him one time previously, back in the 80s, actually, but it wasn't the kind of thing where I had a chance to have a conversation with him. He just did a one-man performance piece, but anyway, so we at this film festival, I got a chance to chat with him a little bit afterwards. They had a Q&A on the stage when they showed the movie, but then after the movie was over, some of the people that were there kind of congregated around him because he was in the audience. And he was very, friendly and genial because everyone was kind of being cordial and friendly with him. There was no, rush to take up his time or anything like that. But everyone was just like, wanted to say hi to him and that sort of thing. So I went up to him and I told him that, I had a book to give him, Movies on My Mind, which was my film column book, and that I was planning on self-publishing a book about 2001, and could I get an address from him so I could send him a copy when it came out. And he was very cordial, and he said, "Well, contact the guy who's moderating this thing, the film festival, and I'll make sure he gets an address that he can give to you." So we planned on doing that, and then what happened was a few months went by, and I got the publishing deal with McFarlane for my 2001 book, which was very unexpected, but I got it. So I thought, okay, I'm actually going to have a real publisher involved. And so I trying to remember what I did. I sent Keir Dullea a letter, I guess, telling him about that or something. But anyway, what happened was when I had signed a contract with McFarlane, by that point I actually had an email address for Keir Dullea.
Okay.
And so what I did was I sent him an email telling him, I may have some good news about my 2001 book. And once I signed the contract and it was a done deal, I felt bold enough to ask here in an email, like, could I send you the manuscript of my book and maybe get you to read it with an eye towards like writing a small review or a foreword or something like that for me. And I thought he would say no, because he didn't really know me and he didn't owe me anything.
Right.
But instead he responded, he says, I'll be happy to. So I sent him a copy of the manuscript, which was the current one I had. I was in the process of expanding it for McFarlane. They wanted a much longer book than I had written at that time. And so I sent Keir a PDF of the manuscript. And when he responded, I was almost afraid to read it. Actually, it took him a while. It took him a while to get back to me. The problem was initially he didn't see the attachment. Like a month went by, and when I contacted him to find out what was going on, he said he was still waiting for me to send the PDF. And I told him I'd already attached it, so I attached it again. And that time he finally got it. And then he responded right away then, and he told me he really liked the book a lot. And he wrote that nice review that you read, which was, amazing. I couldn't believe that, the guy who starred in the movie had that nice of a thing to say about it. So that was very, I was very pleased with that. And like I say, he's a very, very nice guy. When I met him, he was about 79. I think he's like 81 now. Because again, he made the movie 50 years ago when he was 30. But he's a very friendly, cordial person. And, I'm hoping I get the opportunity to meet him again sometime and, maybe do something together to promote my book.
You started to write Kubrick's Monolith, I believe, in 2000, around the time you got your first computer, which was just about a year after the death of Stanley. And you described your work on the book to have been 40 years in the making. Tell us how the process of writing Kubrick's Monolith actually evolved over those 40 years.
As I told you before, I was reading all the books on Kubrick that I could at that time. There weren't a whole lot out originally, and especially about 2001. There was really, when I first started, there was only, or before I started the book, but when I first started reading about Kubrick, there was really only one book on 2001, and that was Jerome Agel's book, The Making of Kubrick's 2001, which really was the Bible for many years about 2001. And I'm talking about the original edition, not the one that came out later that Martin Scorsese edited, which, that eliminated all the photos and all the other stuff that the original book had. So I know people, who are real fans, that's like kind of a book they have to have if you want to talk about 2001. And I certainly got a lot of my initial information about the movie from that. So that fed into me wanting to write about, 2001 at some point. And I had dreams of eventually doing a book, but I had no connections in the industry to get a book going. I was still a fairly young person at that point. I was in my 20s. And I actually contacted a few people to see if anyone was interested in collaborating on a book. I didn't get any real interest that way. And then in like 94, I believe it was, Piers Bozzoni, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly there, wrote a pretty good book on 2001 called 2001 Filming the Future. And I had a copy of that, and I really enjoyed that book. And then, of course, 20 years later, he put out the mammoth upgrade, $1,000 version of that book from Taschen. But at the time that the 94 book came out, there really weren't that many books on 2001. And after reading, Piers's book, I thought, I really do want to write my own book on 2001. As much as I liked his, I thought, there's more that could be said that I wanted to say about it. And then I started really thinking about it seriously. And then in 99, when Kubrick died, I said to myself, well, geez, I better get going with that book because, the main guy just died. And so I started getting serious and thinking about what kind of a book it was going to be. And I just sat down one day and kind of like wrote an outline, of like, one chapter for this, a chapter for that, and basically listed all the things I wanted to read in a book about 2001. And that was sort of my goal, was to write the book that I always wanted to read.
With Stanley
So, in my opinion, listen, I love The Shining, Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket. Like I said, even Barry Lyndon has some great merits.
Yes.
But the one thing that I have to always say is that if Stanley Kubrick had finished AI, artificial intelligence, that film would have been a masterpiece. First half of it, incredible. And then it got a little too cute and commercial, Spielberg, obviously. And not a bad film on its own merit, but wow, I could see his vision just by looking at the half.
Well, you know, the introduction of your book, you write, you know, the intent of this book is to bridge the gap between intellectual analysis and fandom, which is a very clear description of your book. And, you know, 2001, the film is monumental in both ideas and execution. So opening a book on this topic can be, you know, quite intimidating, to say the least. Can you expand on this for our listeners and tell us about your signature approach to this book? Because it does have that.
Well, thank you. I think what my intent is that since I had been writing about film at that point, and I had a certain style, which people told me that I had a very inviting literary voice in the way I wrote about film.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to carry that over into the book on 2001, you know, for sure. And, you know, not to malign any other books about film that are out there, I didn't want to do something that was like overtly scholarly, because a lot of that tends to be very dry. And I didn't want to do that. And you know, I did feel that 2001 was one of those movies that was extremely, you know, intellectual on the one hand, but on the other hand, it resonated with regular people, not just film scholars. So I wanted to be able to make sure my book covered both of those, you know, sides to 2001. And so that was my approach. Was I'm writing this book, you know, with a lot of scholarly intent, but at the same time, I want it to be a very entertaining book. So those were like my twin goals in writing about it. And being a big fan that I was, that wasn't hard to imbue it with a bit of my passion. And I hope it does come through. And so far, you know, from the reviews I've read and the comments I've heard from people, that, you know, it does.
Definitely.
So that was always my goal, was to be a very reader-friendly kind of a book, but at the same time, cover enough scholarly elements of it, you know, that would appeal to that group of people as well.
That's a very tricky thing to pull off, you know, both so adeptly, and I think you really did.
Well, thanks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, speaking of thanks, you yourself thank Keir and Dan Richter in the intro for your book. Can I ask what were their contributions to it?
Sure. Dan's a very nice guy, by the way. He and I became Facebook friends. Even though we don't communicate a lot, you know, we have liked each other's posts and have occasionally commented on things. But he's an extremely friendly, nice guy. And I had read his book, Moonwatcher's Memoirs, years ago, which I used a lot of information from that when I was writing my own book. And what happened was, in the case of Dan, I had run into a couple of things that I had learned about 2001 that I didn't have full information on. And so I contacted Dan to see if he could clear up a few details that I had uncovered that I didn't have verification of. And he was, you know, kind enough to give me some information that way, you know, just through some email exchanges.
Right.
And in the case of Keir, it was really the fact that he was so generous in writing that review for me. That was really our only interaction regarding 2001. And I just, you know, felt it was necessary to at least mention his name in that regard. And I also did mention in the, I think it's the preface of the book, about, you know, first meeting him back in the 80s. I have a small section of the preface there, that refers to our first meeting.
There's another statement in the intro about the film in which she said, fortunately 2001 is one of the few films that fits comfortably in both these worlds, intellectual analysis and fandom. Perhaps that is also why it will endure. I think that's a really interesting assessment of the film itself. When did you personally realize that 2001 Space Odyssey was able to bridge that gap and really stretch across both these levels of audiences?
I don't really know when that occurred to me, because I was a fan of the movie from the very beginning, the very first time I saw it, and fortunately I had read the novel before I saw the movie, which I think did help me appreciate it more at the time. I mean, I knew there's differences between the book and the movie, but understanding some aspects of it, because I had no idea 2001 was going to be so radical when I saw it. So having the novel kind of in the back pocket of my mind was very useful to me to, I think, even appreciating the movie more than I would have, though I'm sure I would have liked it no matter what. And so I was just a fan from day one. And I guess it wasn't until I was working on the book, which I wrote between 2000 and 2005. That's when I actually wrote the original manuscript before I did the expansion and stuff. So I don't think it was until I was actually working on writing like a preface or an introduction, whatever, that it occurred to me that the movie did cover both aspects of appreciation, meaning the analytical and the fandom side, which my book was going to be doing. So I guess it wasn't really, I couldn't have put that into words until I actually was writing the book. So that it didn't occur to me as a conscious thought probably until then.
Right. Well, 2001 is a film that I feel, and I'm sure I speak for many, many, many Stanley Kubrick fans when I say we feel, it's a film that transcends words in terms of trying to discuss the meaning or the form. Were you at all intimidated by just the subject itself while you were digging in and really trying to write the book?
No, because I was such a fan of the movie. Like I say, this is something that was many years in the thinking, that wanting to do a book on 2001. So I didn't feel any intimidation at all about writing about it. I just approached it as a fan, like initially. And it's funny. It's not until you really deconstruct the movie that you learn so much more. I mean, I'd seen the movie a bunch of times. I actually saw it, I think about 30 times in the theater.
Wow.
And it wasn't until I was really deconstructing it for the book, and watching it over and over again on video, that I was picking up so much more. I mean, this is a film I thought I knew everything about, and it wasn't until I was actually writing the book and exploring it and deconstructing the film in detail that I realized there was so much more going on than I had even realized. And I'm not talking just about the intellectual side of the movie, just even some nuts and bolts things, stuff I hadn't really picked up on in a complete way. I was picking up on much more in rewatching it and rethinking it. So I would recommend that for almost anybody. Like, if you really like a movie a lot, try deconstructing it sometime, because I think you'll learn a lot more.
It's funny, but I always see his films themselves as reflections of, as a term I've used before on the show, is like, his highly compartmentalized mind. And that's something I've always been drawn to Stanley, about very much, is that I'm really drawn to those rare people who have that ability to cross-reference and, as I call it, gear shift, constantly shifting gears. There's nothing ADD about it. It's just a very high-functioning mind. And his films reflect his mind in the sense that, you can deconstruct them and take them apart piece by piece. And were you to try and reassemble them back together in any other way but the way that he placed them, piece by piece, it wouldn't make sense. It's kind of hard to explain, but I mean, I just think that your book is a really thoughtful very modern day retrospective of, you know, a 50-year-old movie at this point. And your book is as worthy a companion to the film itself as any out there. I mean, it ranks with the greatest, man. I'm not just saying that. It's got 9. It's the truth, Joe. It was in 9 chapters. I mean, on separate and well-defined areas. All of our listeners should definitely check out Joe's book. I mean, each chapter contains really interesting information. So I want to ask how you broke it down. What were your choices in, deconstructing into those 9 chapters?
I don't remember specifically why I came up with the different chapters the way I did. Other than that, I definitely had certain things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to introduce the book in a specific way that made you realize who was involved in the making of it, meaning Kubrick and Clark. And I wanted to talk about the creation of the script in its intellectual capacity and even its emotional capacity, for that matter. So at a certain point, it became obvious what the chronology of the book was going to be, that I was going to cover the beginning of Kubrick and Clark meeting, and then the formulation of the script, and then the hiring of the special effects people on down the line, through each aspect of the making of the film, concluding with, I guess, as far as the making of the film, concluding with the music. And then after that, it was going to be about, what was the reaction by the public and by the industry itself, and that's sort of how the book flowed. And then when I hooked up with McFarlane and they wanted the book to be longer, I came up with 2 new chapters that I hadn't had before in there. One of them was about what it was like to watch the movie. I wanted to take you through the entire experience of watching the film, which I didn't have that in the original version of the book. And then the last chapter, which is actually an afterward chapter, which is about Stanley Kubrick's legacy. So those were the 2 new ones, and I just simply padded and bulked out the rest of the chapters that needed it. Because in fact, I look at the book now and I keep thinking, oh God, why didn't I add this? Why didn't I add that? Because it could be endless. You could go on the rest of your life with that. But I'm happy with how it turned out. But that's sort of how the chronology of the book took place. And a friend of mine who read it, I remember her really enjoying that aspect of the book. She told me how one chapter seemed to flow into the next in a very progressive manner. Yes. That was she thought was just right, and so that was nice to know that someone had picked up on that.
Well, it's perhaps a silly question to ask. It's like asking which is your favorite child. But did you have a chapter that you enjoyed working on the most? And if so, can just tell our listeners a few interesting facts from that chapter?
Okay, I'll see what I can do. It is a hard question because like you say, who's your favorite child? Even though I don't have kids, I still understand that sort of question.
Yeah.
It is difficult to say. I like the chapter about it's called The Art of Monoliths, and which goes into the symbolic meaning of the film. I think that's a good chapter as far as getting across certain points I wanted to, without being overly dry about it. Like I say, you can get very dry when you get academic sometimes. So I do like that one. And ironically, one chapter I was never really sure I was happy with is the one about watching the movie. I took me a long time to be satisfied with that chapter when I was writing it. But after the fact, it's actually one of my favorite chapters now to reread.
That's really cool.
So those 2 stand out the most, I would say. And I also like the photo diary chapter at the end. When I went to New York back in 2000, that was originally going to be the beginning of the book, but the publisher thought it would be better as an appendix chapter at the end, and I was fine with that. But I thought that chapter made my book somewhat unique, that nobody else had done something like that.
And Look, the man himself seems to have only grown in stature since his passing in 1999, and his films are just more and more popular today than they were in his lifetime. Now, given that you were an early disciple, pupil, student of the cinema and digging into him back in the day, would you agree with that? That his
pretty
stature,
much. I mean, I think he's become more popular now than when he was alive. I mean, I think his films always resonated, even during his lifetime.
True.
They didn't always break the box office the week they came out, but they've always maintained their stature, I think. But clearly, once he passed away, and a lot of the people around him no longer felt reserved about talking about him, which I think they felt while he was alive. I think that's changed. That's made him more popular than when he was alive, which is very ironic, I think, because he clearly wanted to be a success as a filmmaker, but he kind of shied away from doing interviews and whatnot. And so certainly he's become a bigger name since he passed away. And part of that's also due to the internet and the fact that there's these sites like, the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society and the other ones that are out there that didn't exist when he was alive in many cases.
Right.
Because the internet was still fairly, in its early stages then. But yes, I'm so happy that he is finally getting the recognition worldwide, and amongst so many other people that didn't exist before. And there was really no outlet for people like me to communicate with other Kubrick fans until these sites appeared. And that's why I'm happy to be a member of a number of them. So I can, even if I don't comment, at least I can hear what other people are saying and thinking, and seeing what their posts are.
I mean, it's great that you've been a member of Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society for almost 4 years now, I believe. And
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned us in your book. I mean, can't thank you enough for that, Joe. I
was happy to.
No, it's really, appreciated. We just love being at the vanguard, so to speak, like with the fan interaction and the worldwide base of enthusiasts. All the Stanley Kubrick enthusiasts of the world have, several places to go, and we're really grateful that, SCAS seems to be, ever growing as like one of the go-to places. And
yeah, well, you're one of the biggest sites out there, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a lot of fun and we take it very seriously. I can speak on behalf of Stephen and Nick Fugazi and, several other people who are involved, and just all the members that, we get to interact with who are so engaged. And, your contributions are always great. And I always, I have a star next to you, so I get notified if you're posting something. I love to check in with everybody, and not the least of which yourself. Were you surprised at all to see the constant dialogue and the intrigue relating to 2001, which still, I mean, it still exists today, and it can easily be seen in Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on a daily basis. Did it surprise you to see like the constant growth of people wanting to discuss it, etc.?
I don't know if it's so much surprising, but it's certainly an appreciative thing because it's such an important movie in my life. And now that I have a book out, obviously I want it to sell. So the more people talk about the movie, the better the chance that they might purchase my book. But it's really nice to see, and it's rewarding as well to see so many people interested in 2001. Because when I was growing up, at the height that the movie came out, I felt very alone. I mean, I had a few friends that liked the movie, but the wider expanse of people I interacted with in high school and elsewhere, weren't interested in the movie or didn't know about it or whatever. I had a few close friends, and the rest were just, everybody else who, were just going about their lives and couldn't care less about, Stanley Kubrick or 2001 or any of his movies. So it's really nice to have access to a group that is so committed to, 2001 and Stanley Kubrick.
Well, thanks, man. Again, it's an honor to have you in the group and your contributions. I know that the spacesuit posts, from last week, that really popped a lot of eyeballs. I thought it was just too bleeping cool, and I mean that's just dedication. That's not even fanboy stuff. That's just real hardcore, old school. First gen.
Well, I was quite obsessed when I was young, so.
Yeah, I mean, well, we all can relate to it in our own ways. I mean, how we all came to Kubrick, or how he became intertwined with our own personal stories is something that every diehard fan, I'm sure, has a tale to tell regarding that, and being a part of Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society is just a treat and an honor, frankly, for me. And it's all thanks to Stephen for creating it, over 6 years ago, and it's grown and but in a very organic way. We're not about just adding members just to beef up the numbers. We really like to see people answer the 2 simple questions to become a member, and from there it's just a joyride. Now, there's one other thing before I get to my last question, which is it seems that you are the person who is responsible for having discovered the connection between the oil painting used in Keir Dullea bedroom at the end of 2001 and the fact that that same painting is used in the James Bond film A View to a Kill. Am I wrong?
Right.
You made that.
No, I first posted that. I think I contacted Stephen, or maybe it was you. I don't remember which, but I contacted the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society, one of you members, about getting some frame grabs of from those two movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying, I gave them the time count on what part of the movie those images showed up, and I said, "Is there anybody that can do some frame grabs of those?" Because
Right.
I don't know how to do that.
It was.
I'm sure it's something I can.
It was Stephen.
Okay.
Sure of it.
So it was thanks to Stephen that I got the frame grabs. I mean, I'd watched the movie. I had just gotten the box set of View to a Kill, or the James Bond series, and I was watching the one movie, View to a Kill, and suddenly, I just saw the painting and recognized it, and I'd seen that movie maybe 6 or 7 times prior to that, the James Bond film, and I'd never noticed it before. But suddenly there it was, and it's like, oh my God, that's the painting that's in the bedroom at the end of 2001. And so that's when I reached out to try to get some frame grabs of it, and Stephen did that, and then I put together a little kind of promo ad about it, little meme thing, whatever, and then posted that on my own page, and I guess it got around a little bit, but that was just a fortuitous thing. I just happened to be watching the movie, and I just happened to notice it, and it's weird, how you can see something a bunch of times and not notice an element in it, and then one day you just notice it.
Oh yeah. I mean
that happens a lot for me.
Well, fortuitous also that you had the eye to catch that, because I've seen View to a Kill probably as many times, I don't know, anywhere between half a dozen times. I was an 80s teen, so I, part of the whole VCR movement, and loved watching Bond movies again and again.
Right.
But I
saw it in the theater too.
Yeah, me too. But I would definitely not have had the eye to pick up on that. And yet I can relate. I mean, the fact that you connected that painting to both pictures is really remarkable. But I can relate to your point about having, let's say you see something X number of times, and then you have the realization that, oh my gosh, I never saw that before. So mine was The Shining. When I was a kid, I was just kind of hypnotized by the film. I didn't know if I understood it, etc. I've mentioned this before, But it was in my late teens or early 20s after I'd already seen it, I don't know, 100 times, maybe 200 at that point, no exaggeration. And I realized, well, if I was like, oh my gosh, if you take Grady out of the scene, you can see that Nicholson is always talking to himself in the mirror. And that's, one of those things, I was about 18, 19 at the time, and I was like thinking, okay, that's why I'm so, enamored of this filmmaker. And the fact that he could make that scene, and set the camera angle up from every position so that, Grady is always stationed between Jack and the mirror. You remove him from the scene since he's not really there anyway. He's a ghost. And Jack saying to himself, I know you killed your wife and family. And the other scene when Danny's at the kitchen table with Scatman Crothers, and he said, and the moment he cuts to him asking, is there something bad in this place, is the moment we see all the kitchen knives magnetized.
Right, yeah, I remember catching that one.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw the movie 100 times before I was like, oh, wait, snap, oh, my God. And that was like when I was like, yeah, that's why it's Stanley for me, and nobody else really, has the, I don't know. There's many other directors I admire, but it's kind of like the Beatles. There's the Beatles, and then there's everyone else. There's Kubrick, and then there's everyone else.
Right. Yeah, I feel a lot the same way. Yes.
Loved your recent post with the you posted Deadpool, the superhero, and Deadpool, Frank Poole, comic versus cosmic, and they're both great. You shared that to Scass recently. That was a big hit. I loved it.
Yeah, I love Deadpool the movie, and in fact, I think not to get off point here or anything like that, but the opening song in Deadpool with the opening credits, which is Juice Newton's "Angel in the Morning," whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's as radical a use of music as Kubrick using the Blue Danube, for space flight.
Interesting.
I have to say I can't think of anything else that's that radical. That seems so inappropriate on the one hand, but was so perfect. On the other hand. And I just rewatched, Deadpool recently. I really enjoy that movie. I think it's so funny. But anyway, yeah, I agree with you that Kubrick is more or less a unique filmmaker. There's him, and then there's basically everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything about the guy. No film school, going to the cinema to absorb everything when he was a kid, and just coming out of certain sci-fi B movies thinking, well, if I could get my hands on a camera and some sound equipment, I can't possibly make a film worse than that. I mean, I love that stuff.
Right.
I mean, that's where you get to point at that rare human like that and say, yeah, there's him, and then there's everybody else. So, I mean, we all have our own little answer to this question, I suppose, and there's no right answer. And myriad ways one can answer the question. But my last one for you, Joe, is very simply, who is Stanley Kubrick?
Well, I think it's similar to what we said. I mean, he's unique. He was an innovator, and he was obviously very self-assured in what he was doing. They bandy the word, genius around a lot, and I don't know if he was a genius or not. He always denied that, but he clearly thought in ways that other people didn't. And, he never did things the traditional way. So I think that really, explains why his work is enduring to this day, because every film he's done has been unique and innovative in one way or another, all the way up to the end. And I think when he started out, he did a Day of the Fight, and he did some other short documentaries. But once he got into features, I mean, his first one, he went for like some art house kind of thing, and that didn't work too well. So then he decided, okay, I have to do more, traditional noirish kind of films. So he did a couple of those, basically to get his foot in the door. I think, he was always thinking about, how can I progress as a filmmaker and become a success. So he followed a certain formula that he decided on. Like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And then, he kept working his way up the line until he basically had total control of every aspect of his filmmaking. I mean, he did the Spartacus thing, I think, really just to, he needed a paycheck probably at that point in his life. And he also needed to have a big budget film under his belt that he could say, hey, I can do it, just to let the world know out there that, he was a player. So everything he did, had a certain calculation to it by any means. And it was all to further his career because obviously this is what he wanted to do. He was interested in photography as a young man, and that just kind of blossomed into filmmaking. And but all of his films were just so unique. Any film he did, going back to the beginning, I think has a certain something about it that no one else was able to do.
Absolutely.
And I love all of his movies. I think they're all great. I've been a huge fan of him for like so many years. And obviously 2001 is my favorite because I wrote a book about it. But I like them all, and I'm so happy that he's finally being recognized as a great filmmaker, because even though he had his fans and supporters when he was alive, really it wasn't until he passed away that things really took off for him as a personality. He's as famous, I think, today as like Hitchcock was in his lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's like, just again, for someone like me, that's so rewarding to know that he will be remembered. And thanks to, organizations like yours and some of the other ones that are out there, you're helping to keep his name alive with the public. And that's, I think, a great thing.
Thanks, man. I mean, we love doing it. It's all for him. I mean, he obviously touched so many people in so many unique and personal ways, and yet there's a universality to our connection to him through his work and his life. And it's just a thrill and an honor, like I said before, to be another torchbearer and keep the flame alive of his legacy. I love that we get the chance to, answer questions for, newer fans. There's some people who join the group and they're young film students, and they're writing a paper and such, and they can turn to us as a resource for help. And I personally think that's really cool. I'm not old, but I'm not a youngin' anymore. So I kind of walk that line between wanting to help them out and, enjoying that same, that same form of newfound enthusiasm, because it keeps mine refreshed all the time. And anyway, I mean, just too cool of you to join us. I can't thank you enough. It's been great.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed discussing it with you.
Well, I want everybody that's listening to pick up Joe's book, Kubrick's Monolith, 2017. Stephen is going to mention it again and the available outlets in his outro. So with that, I just want to thank you again. It's been awesome. You've been a great guest, man, really. Too cool. Thanks for being on Kubrick's Universe, Joe.
Oh, my pleasure, as always.
Thanks, Joe and Jason. We spoke to Joe on the 12th of March 2018. Joe's book is called Kubrick's Monolith, The Art and Mystery of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and is available online at McFarlane's website or on Amazon. Of course, why not go and watch 2001: A Space Odyssey? Give yourself a little treat. Thanks to Anthony from Caldwell for telling us who is Stanley Kubrick. And of course, thanks to our marvellous host, Jason Furlong. If you want any more info about this episode, check out the show notes on your podcast player or search Kubrick's Universe online. Thanks to James and Jason and myself for keeping the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society on Facebook running smoothly. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Kubrick's Universe, and thanks for listening. I'm Stephen Rigg. Tatty bye.
It's Kubrick's Universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick Podcast. Come back soon.